Gunfire cracked in the far distance as Ruby Quinn's bare feet slammed against the dry Texas ground breath, hitching wild with fear. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. At just 19, she'd finally summoned the guts to break free from the prison that was her father's farm. But freedom wasn't free, and the price was steep. Blood oozed from the cuts on her soles, mixing with the dust, as she ran blindly through knee-high grass, her torn dress snagging on thorns and brush. It was 1875, and the Texas frontier showed no kindness to a girl on her own. Ruby's golden hair streamed like sunlight behind her as she risked a glance back. Her heart stuttered. Dark figures on horseback closed in fast. Her father, Virgil Kane, and her two brothers. They were coming for her. Her ribs ached from the pounding in her chest, but she forced her legs to keep moving. She knew what lay ahead if they caught her beatings, days locked in that dark cellar, and hunger sharp enough to make her scream. "There she is," Virgil's voice thundered across the prairie. "Get her." Ruby stumbled up a rise, choking back a sob as her vision blurred with panic and exhaustion. She'd slipped away before dawn while the house slept, praying for a head start. But they'd noticed she was gone too soon, and now that small advantage was all but gone. She heard hoofbeats again, but this time from a different direction. Terror coiled tight in her chest. Was it another of her father's drinking buddies? Come to drag her back? She turned sharply, veering toward a sparse stand of cottonwoods, the only cover in sight. "Miss, this way," a deep voice called out. A tall cowboy came riding hard on a chestnut stallion, face half-shadowed by his weathered hat. As he drew up beside her, he leaned low and held out his hand. "Grab on," he urged, blue eyes fierce beneath the brim. Ruby froze for a heartbeat. Then the thundering of horses behind her made the choice clear. She reached up. His grip was iron-strong, and with one powerful pull he swept her off the ground and into the saddle ahead of him. "Hang on," he said, wrapping an arm tight around her as he spurred the stallion forward. The horse surged beneath them, wind lashing Ruby's face, the stranger's arm a firm anchor around her waist. The world blurred as they fled across the prairie. "They're right behind us," she cried, casting a glance over her shoulder. "Let 'em chase," the cowboy murmured near her ear. "Thunderbolt's the fastest damn horse in 3 counties. He guided the stallion down into a dry ravine, winding through the brush like a snake before cutting sharply east. The trick worked. When Ruby dared another look, their pursuers were gone from sight. "I'm Colter Hayes," the cowboy said, not slowing. "Mind telling me who you are, Miss Ruby?" she whispered. "Ruby Quinn." "Well now, Miss Quinn," he drawled, easing the pace just slightly, as they neared a patch of trees. "Looks like you found yourself in a real bad fix. Those men back there, they're your kin," she gave a broken nod. "My pa and my brothers. Please, don't take me back. I'd rather die." Something in her voice must have struck deep because his arm pulled her in closer. "Ain't no way I'm delivering you back to the kind of folks a girl runs from Barefoot, but we gotta keep moving. Your feet are torn up something fierce, and we need more ground between us and them before dark." They rode hard, cutting through brush, fording shallow streams, following trails only deer might know. All the while, Ruby became acutely aware of the man holding her. His body was solid and warm against hers, every movement of his horse in perfect sync with his own. She didn't know him, but the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her back eased the panic within her, little by little. By noon they reached a small cabin nestled in a grove of oaks. "Line shack," Colter explained, helping her down. "Part of the broken Spur. I work there. We'll lay low here for the night." Ruby winced as her raw feet hit the ground, agony catching up now that adrenaline was fading. Colter noticed right away. "Don't move," he said. Without another word, he scooped her up in his arms and carried her inside. The shack was rough but tidy wood stove table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot. He set her down gently. "Stay put," he said. "Gotta see to Thunderbolt. Then I'll fix up them feet." Left alone, Ruby sat in silence, staring at the empty hearth. She'd escaped hell, but now what? She had nothing. No money, no belongings. Just the dress on her back and a stranger's mercy. A few minutes later, Colter returned with a bucket of water and began building a fire. "Let's get you patched up," he said, kneeling before her. The gentleness in his tone didn't match the rugged lines of his face. He cleaned the blood and dirt from her torn soles, slow and careful. Ruby watched him closely. Sun-browned skin, dark hair curling at the edges of his neck, hands tough from ranch work, but astonishingly gentle. "How'd you find me?" she asked, wincing as he pulled a thorn from her heel. "Was riding fence," he answered, voice low. "Heard some shouting, figured someone was in trouble, so I came looking." He met her gaze, then those sharp blue eyes searching her face. "You gonna tell me why you were running barefoot with those fellas after you?" Ruby looked down at her lap, twisting her hands together. "My ma died 3 years back. After that, my pa changed, started drinking, turned mean, tried marrying me off to a man older than him. When I refused, he locked me in the root cellar, beat me. I got out this morning, but I didn't have time to grab shoes. When I refused to marry the old fool, my pa picked out a friend of his old enough to be my granddaddy. He beat me half to death and tossed me in the root cellar like a sack of grain," Ruby whispered, voice barely steady. "I slipped out this morning, but there wasn't time for shoes or food." Colter's jaw clenched hard, but his voice stayed gentle. "Ain't no soul deserves that kind of life, Miss Quinn. You did right by running." He cleaned her feet the best he could with some torn cloth, then rustled up a simple supper beans and biscuits, the kind every line shack kept stashed. As they ate by the soft flicker of lamplight, he looked across the table. "Tomorrow, I'll take you to the main ranch house. Miss Hattie Jed Rourke's wife, she's got a good heart. She might find you some work round the place till you figure things out." "Why are you doing this?" Ruby finally asked the question, gnawing at her, since he'd pulled her from the prairie. Colter stared into the lantern flame a moment. "Had a sister once. She tried to run from a bad place too, but no one helped her. I guess I'm just paying that debt forward." That night, he insisted Ruby take the cot. He laid his blanket by the door rifle within arm's reach. But sleep didn't come easy for her. Freedom had a price, and she wasn't sure yet if she'd paid it or just started the toll. Come morning, the scent of coffee roused her. Colter had already been up tending Thunderbolt and packing for the ride. "They might still be looking," he said, steadying her as she stood. Her feet had stiffened overnight, pain rippling with each step. "We'd best get moving." He used some old leather and rags to make rough shoes for her, then lifted her up into the saddle. The ride to the ranch took most of the morning. When they reached the ridge, Ruby let out a soft gasp. The broken spur stretched below like something out of a dream 2-story house. Big barns, long corrals, bunkhouses lined along the slope. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's home," Colter said, pride warming his tone. "Been working here since I was 16. As they neared the house, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair stepped out onto the porch, squinting into the sun. "Colter Hayes. What sort of mischief you been into? Jed was asking where you disappeared off to yesterday. Got sidetracked, Miss Hattie," he called back, hopping down and helping Ruby dismount. "This here's Miss Ruby Quinn. She's in a rough spot and could use a safe place for a spell." Hattie. May's eyes took in the girl-torn dress-bandaged feet, fear lingering like smoke in her gaze. Without a moment's hesitation, she stepped forward and took Ruby's hand. "Come on in, honey," Let's get you washed up and fed proper. Ruby hesitated, glancing back at Colter. He gave her a soft smile. Go on. She'll take good care of you. I got a report to the foreman, but I'll check in on you later. The hours that followed passed in a haze. Miss Hattie ran a hot bath, fetched clean clothes that once belonged to her married daughter, and served up a warm, filling meal that made Ruby realize how hollow her belly had become. After hearing her story, Hattie's expression turned hard. A real father don't treat his girl like that, she declared. You'll stay as long as you need. We always got room for another good hand. And you're safe here, child. That evening, Ruby sat on the porch, watching the sun melt across the sky in ribbons of fire and gold. Colter appeared beside her, fresh from the day's work. Heard you're sticking around, he said, easing into the chair beside her. Glad to hear it. She turned to him, voice soft. I owe you, Colter. You saved my life. He smiled, just a flicker, but it changed his whole face. Anyone would have done the same. No, Ruby shook her head slowly. Most folks would have looked the other way, or worse, dragged me back for a pat on the back from my father. They sat in silence, listening to the hush settle over the ranch as night fell. You think they'll come looking for me here? She finally asked. Colter exhaled slow. Broken Spur's one of the biggest outfits in the region. Jed Rourke's got pull with the law and respect in every saloon from here to Abilene. Even if your pa finds out, he'll think long and hard before stirring up trouble here. His words comforted her some, but she knew Virgil Kane. That man didn't know the meaning of quit. The next morning, Miss Hattie gave Ruby a tour of the big house and laid out her duties. Compared to the drudgery back at her father's farm, it felt almost like breathing for the first time. The Rourkes treated their people fair with dignity. In the days that followed, Ruby began to settle in. Her feet healed. Her shoulders dropped from the weight of fear, and her eyes, once hollow and wary, began to brighten. She saw Colter often passing through the main house on business or seated beside her at Sunday supper when Miss Hattie insisted. Ruby found herself watching for him, pulse quickening when he rode up. 2 weeks after arriving, she was hanging laundry out in the yard when she heard horses. She turned and froze. 3 riders crested the drive. She knew them instantly. Virgil Kane, Eli, Noah. The sheet slipped from her hands as she bolted toward the house, heart slamming against her ribs. She burst through the kitchen door where Miss Hattie was stirring a pot. They're here, Ruby gasped, face drained of color. They found me, my pa and brothers, they're here. Ruby's voice trembled as she stood frozen in the kitchen. Hattie Mae wiped her hands on her apron, her face hardening with the kind of resolve forged from a lifetime in the West. Stay put, Ruby. I'll handle this. But Ruby wasn't hiding anymore. Fear gave way to something fiercer, a fire that had been growing since the day she broke free. She followed Hattie Mae out onto the porch, planting herself just behind the older woman as the riders drew closer. Virgil Kane swung down from his saddle, heavy boots thudding against the earth. His beard was thick, his eyes sunken with drink and bitterness. He spotted Ruby and snarled, "There you are, girl. You've stirred up enough damn trouble. Get your things. You're coming home." "She's not going anywhere with you." "Mr. Kane," Hattie said coolly, her arms crossed like iron bars. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't waver either. Virgil's face flushed with fury. "This here's family business, woman. Step aside. She's under my roof now, and my husband's. You're welcome to discuss it with Jed when he rides back from town." Hattie shot back without flinching. Eli and Noah shifted awkwardly in their saddles. They hadn't expected resistance, not from a woman, not from anyone. "You got no right keeping my girl," Virgil spat, stepping closer. "She's mine till she's wed. That's the law." A calm but firm voice rang out from behind him. Law don't much care for fathers who beat their daughters and throw 'em in dark cellars. Colter Hayes stepped out from the corral boots, crunching dry dirt. His hand hovered near his holster, and a small crowd of ranch hands, Zeke, Buck, Clay, Roy, were slowly gathering their expressions hard as stone. Virgil turned to him, jaw clenched. You're the one who snatched her." "I helped a girl running for her life," Colter replied, eyes steady. "And I'd do it again without a blink." The silence thickened. The Kane men were outnumbered, and the set of every ranch hand's jaw said plain, they wouldn't let Ruby be taken. Virgil looked back at his daughter. "This ain't over," he hissed. Ruby stepped forward. Chin lifted her voice, low but sure. "I'm not going back with you, Pa. Not now, not ever. That life was nothing but pain and fear. What I've found here, it's something better. It's freedom. It's dignity." Virgil's face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful! I think we're done here," Colter cut in, placing himself between them. "Miss Quinn's made her choice. Time you respected it." For a moment it looked like Virgil might lunge, but the eyes around him told a different story. With a final glare, he mounted up. "You're dead to me, girl," he spat. "Don't come crawling back when they toss you aside." He yanked the reins and galloped off, Eli and Noah trailing behind with less conviction. Ruby stood trembling, but free. She had faced the monster from her past and hadn't backed down. The weight on her shoulders lightened in a way she hadn't thought possible. That evening, Colter found her by the pond behind the house, tossing stones across the water. "You were mighty brave today," he said, settling into the grass beside her. Ruby gave a faint smile. Didn't feel like bravery. Felt like desperation. "Sometimes they're the same thing," he said, skipping a flat stone. "Standing your ground when every bone in you says run, that's courage." She studied his profile in the dimming light, the quiet strength in his features. "Colter, why'd you really help me that day? Tell me the truth." He was silent a long while. "Then quietly I told you about my sister, Gracie Blue." He nodded. "What I didn't say was, no one helped her. She ran, but no one stopped to care. She didn't make it. When I saw you running across that field barefoot and scared, it was like seeing her ghost. I couldn't ride on. I couldn't fail another girl the way the world failed her." Without thinking, Ruby reached over and laid her hand atop his. "I'm sorry about Gracie," she whispered, "and I'm real thankful you were there for me." Their eyes locked. Something unspoken passed between them. Shared loss. Shared healing. The first flicker of something neither of them dared name just yet. As the summer deepened, Ruby began to bloom at the broken spur. Hattie Mae taught her everything from sewing linens to baking bread from scratch. It was the kind of learning her mama had once begun to pass down before life turned cruel. She made friends with the other hands and their wives. Slowly, this place began to feel like something she hadn't known in years home. Her bond with Colter deepened too. He taught her to ride proper, chuckling at how stiff she sat in the saddle at first. "She won't bite," he teased, as she hesitated beside the mare. "Easy for you to say," she muttered. "You were probably born on a saddle." But she got the hang of it, and soon they were taking rides together on quiet afternoons, exploring the ranch's wide, wild reaches. One August day, they stopped near a stream, letting the horses drink, as they rested under a towering oak. "Hattie Mae says I've picked up housekeeping quicker than any gal she's taught," Ruby said with a touch of pride. "She's even showing me how to manage the books." Colter smiled. "Well, you sure ain't that scared girl I found running through grass and thorns. I've got you to thank for that," she said softly. "If you hadn't come along." "But I did," he said gently. And now look at you, strong, capable, beautiful." The last word hung between them, heavy as thunder on the horizon. Ruby felt heat rise in her cheeks under Colter's steady gaze. "Colter, I know this might be too soon," he said quickly, his voice rough with nerves. "You've been through hell, and you're still getting your feet under you. I don't want you feeling rushed or cornered." Before he could say more, Ruby reached out and placed her hand gently against his cheek, stopping him cold. "What if I don't want to wait?" she said barely above a whisper. "What if I already know what's in my heart?" The way Colter looked at her made her breath catch hope, longing, and something fierce and deep that sent a shiver down her spine. He leaned in slow, careful, giving her every chance to pull away. Then his lips found hers in a kiss, as tender as it was sure. It was her first, and it lit something inside her she didn't know she carried, warmth, blooming like firelight, a rush of breathless wanting. When they pulled apart, both were breathless. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you," Colter admitted, voice low and husky. Ruby let out a soft laugh. Even when I was filthy and bleeding, running like a scared rabbit, he brushed a lock of her hair behind her ear. "Even then. You had a fire in you, Ruby Quinn. Something unbreakable." From that day on, their bond grew stronger, steady as a mountain trail. Colter never pushed, always respecting her past and letting her lead the pace. They carved out quiet moments between chores, walks under the stars, sunrise rides before the ranch stirred Sunday evenings when things slowed. Jed Rourke noticed the shift in Colter. One evening, watching from the porch with Hattie Mae, he said that girl brought back the light in him. "Ain't seen him smile like that since before Gracie passed." Hattie nodded, eyes soft. They've both carried a lot, but together they shine. By October, with autumn crisp in the air and leaves turning gold, Colter approached Jed with purpose. "Sir," he said without preamble, "I'd like to build a house. That patch you mentioned by East Creek, if it's still open for a senior hand." Jed studied the young man for a moment. This about Miss Quinn Colter nodded, a touch of color in his sun-worn face. "I'm fixin' to ask her to marry me, but I want to offer her more than just a question. I want to give her a home." Jed clapped him on the shoulder. "You've earned it, son, and between us I reckon she'd say yes even if all you had was a canvas tent." With that blessing, Colter set to work. Every spare moment was spent hammering, sawing, shaping timber into a home. Zeke, Buck Clay, and Roy pitched in, no questions asked. Ruby noticed his absences and the way the men grinned around her, but Colter kept his secret close. As Thanksgiving neared, the work was done. A cozy 2-bedroom cabin with a stone hearth and a wraparound porch nestled on a rise overlooking the creek. Cottonwoods framed it like a dream. One brisk November afternoon, Colter asked Ruby to ride with him, saying he had to check on some strays. She jumped at the chance, any excuse to be alone with him. But as they rode into unfamiliar parts of the ranch, curiosity sparked. They crested a hill, and Ruby gasped. Below them stood a charming cabin smoke curling from its chimney. "Colter, whose place is that? I didn't know anyone lived out here." He reined in, watching her closely. "No one does not yet." He dismounted, helped her down, and led her by the hand toward the picket fence gate. Her brows furrowed. "I don't get it. Why are we here?" Colter stopped at the gate and turned to face her. "This is what I've been working on these past months. Jed gave me the land from my years here, and this cabin built it with my own hands and a little help from the boys." Ruby's eyes widened as realization hit. "You built this?" He nodded, nervous now. "I wanted it to be a surprise." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small gold ring. "Ruby Quinn." He began, his voice thick that day. "I saw you tearing across the prairie, barefoot. I didn't know you'd turn my whole world upside down. But you did. You brought light and laughter back into my life. And now, I can't imagine it without you." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me? Will you make this house our home?" Tears welled up in Ruby's eyes as she stared at the ring, and the man who'd saved her in every way. "Yes," she whispered, voice shaking. "Yes, Colter Hayes, I will marry you." His grin was pure sunlight as he slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss full of promise and love. "Come on," he said gently. "Let me show you the rest." Inside the cabin was simple, but filled with care furniture. Colter had made himself a colorful quilt gifted by Hattie Mae, a tidy little kitchen stocked with essentials. Colter stood back, suddenly unsure. "It ain't much," he said quietly. "Not compared to the big house." Ruby turned to him, eyes shining. "It's perfect. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, because you built it with love." 2 weeks later, they were wed in a simple ranch ceremony. Jed and Hattie stood as witnesses' ranch hands, and their families gathered round. Hattie helped Ruby sew her gown from ivory muslin and lent her a lace veil once worn by her daughter. Colter wore his best shirt and boots polished like mirrors. As Ruby walked down the aisle, her face lit with joy, Colter looked at her like she was the only thing in the world. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Amos Granger declared. "You may kiss your bride." Their kiss sealed more than love. It was a vow of belonging, of shared burdens, and quiet healing. The wedding feast that followed was a raucous mix of laughter, fiddle tunes, and enough home-cooked food to feed the whole frontier. As dusk painted the sky in dusty pinks, Colter and Ruby slipped away from the clamor, riding through the twilight toward the cabin he'd built for them with his own hands. Standing on the porch, Colter lifted her in his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hayes," he murmured, crossing the threshold. That night, as they lay in the warmth of their new bed, Ruby turned to him, eyes wide in the lamplight. "What's rolling through that head of yours?" Colter asked, brushing his fingers lazily across her bare shoulder. "How strange this life is," she said, curling closer. "Half a year ago I was running from hell with nothing but fear in my chest. Now I feel like I'm living in a dream I never dared to have." "You saved yourself, Ruby," he whispered. "You chose to run, and you chose to catch me," she replied, propping herself on one elbow to meet his gaze. "I think we saved each other." He kissed her, then a deep, slow kiss full of fire and promise. In each other's arms, they hadn't just found shelter, they'd found something to fight for. The winter of 1875 into 76 was merciless, with winds that howled and snow that fell thick as flour. But inside their cabin, Colter and Ruby built a life of warmth. He rode out before sunrise to the main ranch at Broken Spur, returning late with snow in his beard. Ruby tended the hearth, helped Hattie Mae at the big house, and honed her skills as a cook and keeper under the older woman's steady guidance. One crisp February afternoon, as Ruby stirred stew by the hearth, 2 riders approached. Colter, home early that day, stepped outside, his hand drifting near the colt at his side. Ruby joined him and froze. "It's my brothers," she said, breath catching. "Eli and Noah." They dismounted quietly, unsure. Boys still Eli, around 20. Noah, even younger. Colter's tone was clipped. "What brings you out this way?" Eli removed his hat, twisting it in nervous hands. "We came to check on Ruby, to make sure she's okay." Ruby stepped forward, guarded but curious. Her brothers had never raised a hand against her, but they'd never stood in her defense either. They'd followed Virgil Kane's orders without question. "I'm fine," she said evenly. "More than fine." The boys looked at each other before Noah finally said, "Pa's dead. Pneumonia took him fast right after New Year. The words hit harder than she expected. Despite everything, Virgil Kane was still her father. His death closed a door, one she thought had been slammed long ago. Colter's steady hand rested on her shoulder. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said, after a moment. "There's more," Eli added. "The farm's ours now. We've tried to manage it, but it's a mess. What he means, Noah said, is we've got no clue what we're doing. The place is falling apart without you, Ruby." She felt a flood of emotions. Vindication. Sadness. Gratitude for the life she now had. The girl they'd once ignored was now the woman they needed. "I'm not coming back," she said, voice firm. "My life's here, with my husband." "We don't want you to move back," Eli added quickly. "Just help us. A visit. Maybe show us the ropes." Ruby looked at Colter. He didn't say a word, just gave her the smallest nod, the kind only she would catch. "You boys look like you could use a warm meal," Colter said at last, letting his stance ease. "Come on in." Over supper, the brothers shared gossip from neighboring farms' community changes, bits of news. It was awkward, but it was real. By the fire later that night, Noah admitted, "We thought Pa was right about everything. But seeing you now, Ruby, happy like this, makes us think maybe he was wrong." "Folks can change," Ruby said softly, "even if they're set in their ways. It's never too late to try a different road." They slept on bedrolls near the hearth. By dawn, a plan was made. Ruby would ride with Colter to the old homestead the following week. A short visit. Enough to help Eli and Noah get their bearings. As they waved goodbye, a quiet settled in Ruby's heart. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. "You sure about this?" Colter asked, his voice low, as they watched the silhouettes of the two riders fade into the distance. Ruby leaned into him, drawing quiet strength from the warmth of his side. "They're still just boys," she murmured. "They were trapped under Pa's rule, same as I was. But now they've got a shot at their own future." The visit to the old Kane farm felt like walking into a ghost town of her past. But Ruby didn't shrink from it, not with Colter by her side, his presence a steady wall between her and the shadows that once haunted every corner. She moved through the house with confidence, showing her brothers how to run things, sharing their mama's old recipes, and helping them carve out some kind of order from the chaos. After 3 days, something subtle had shifted. The bond between her and the boys was no longer broken. It was bruised, but healing. As they rode away, the farmhouse shrinking behind them, Ruby turned to Colter. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with meaning, "for knowing I needed to face that." But Colter reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. "You're the strongest woman I know, Ruby Quinn, and the most forgiving." Spring came in a rush of wildflowers and warm winds washing the land clean. And with it, Ruby felt something stirring inside her, a quiet change she couldn't ignore. When the doctor confirmed her suspicions, she could hardly wait for Colter to get home. She cooked his favorite supper, set the table just so, and placed a tiny pair of hand-knitted baby booties beside his plate. Hattie Mae had helped her stitch them in secret. Colter stepped through the door, bone-tired from a long day on the range. "What's all this?" he asked, wiping his hands clean at the basin. "Sit down," Ruby said, her eyes glittering with mischief and joy. "I've got something to tell you." He dropped into the chair, and then his gaze landed on the booties. For a heartbeat, he didn't understand. Then it hit. "Ruby, are you—" She nodded, tears brimming. "We're having a baby Colter. Come fall, we'll be 3. The look on his face, pure wonder, pure love, etched itself into her soul. He stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most fragile and sacred thing on earth. "A baby," he whispered into her hair. "Our baby." That night, Colter lay beside her, his hand resting reverently on her belly, still flat, but no less precious. "I swear to you, Ruby, and to this little one, you'll never know the fear we grew up in. Only safety. Only love." Ruby laid her hand over his and smiled softly. "I know. That's why I fell for you." The months rolled on a blur of joy and preparation. Colter added a nursery to the cabin with his own 2 hands, working late into the evenings. The ranch hands' wives threw a gathering showering Ruby with tiny clothes and baby blankets. Hattie Mae gifted them a cradle carved from old cedar used for her own babies long ago. Eli and Noah came by twice during her pregnancy, bringing keepsakes from their mother's hope chest things Ruby thought lost to time. They swapped memories, some good, some bittersweet, slowly stitching their bond back together. As Ruby's belly swelled, Colter grew more protective by the day. He arranged for Martha Jo Briggs, a ranch hand's wife, to stay with Ruby when he was out, just to be sure she'd never be alone. "You're fussin' too much," Ruby teased one evening as he took the dish rag from her hands. "Women been birthing babies since the dawn of time." "Yeah, but none of them were you," Colter said firm. "And none of those babies were mine." He was right to worry. When labor came, it struck hard in the middle of a November storm that turned the roads to rivers. The midwife couldn't reach them. Colter had to ride through hell and back to fetch help. He returned drenched, dragging in Hattie Mae Collins and Martha Jo. Hattie had seen more births than anyone in the territory, and she took charge the second she walked through the door. "Men are useless during this part," she snapped at Colter. "Boil water. Keep out of the way." For 16 agonizing hours, Colter waited, pacing outside the bedroom, while wind howled and rain pounded the windows. And then, just as dawn broke, a sound pierced the storm. A baby's cry. Hattie emerged, hair askew and eyes shining. "You've got a daughter, Colter. Healthy as a spring calf and pretty as they come." When he stepped into the room, time stopped. Ruby lay there exhausted but radiant, her arms wrapped around a tiny, perfect bundle. She looked up at him with a smile that nearly broke him. "Come meet your girl," she said softly, tilting the bundle so he could see the little face pink and wrinkled with a crown of dark fuzz on her head. Colter took his daughter into his arms, hands shaking. She was so small, yet somehow filled up the whole room. Filled up his whole heart. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice raw. "Just like her mama." They named her Daisy June Hayes, a tribute to both Colter's sister Gracie Blue, lost too young, and to Hattie Mae Collins, the woman who had stood beside Ruby like a mother when she needed one most. When they introduced their baby girl to the broken Spur community, their love story had already become the stuff of campfire legend, the barefoot girl fleeing for her life, and the cowboy who caught up to her just in time. "Sounds like something out of a dime store novel," one of the younger ranch hands joked during the christening celebration. Colter just laughed, his arm slung around Ruby's waist as she held their daughter. "Better than any story I've ever read," he said, "because it's real." As Daisy grew, so did the life around her. The once humble cabin expanded with each year and every blessing. 2 years after Daisy's birth, came Luke Hayes, their son, quiet and curious. Then came the twins, Millie Rose and Josie Bell, as different as sun and shadow, but inseparable, all the same. Colter's role at the Broken Spur evolved steadily. He became foreman, trusted by every hand, and deeply respected by Jed Rourke, who leaned on him more with each passing year. Ruby, meanwhile, built a reputation far beyond the ranch for her hearty meals and warm heart. Young brides rode in from all over the county just to learn her ways. Her brothers Eli and Noah Kane became steady fixtures in their lives' uncles who brought laughter and stories and lent a strong hand when needed. With Ruby's guidance, they turned the neglected Kane homestead into a working, profitable farm. The past didn't vanish, but it softened at the edges. On their 5th anniversary, Colter led Ruby to a wind-swept ridge above the ranch. In his hand, the deed to a neighboring piece of land bought with years of quiet saving. For what's ahead, he said, his voice thick. For our kids. And theirs someday. Ruby leaned into him as the wind carried the distant sound of their children's laughter up the hill. "Did you ever imagine this?" she whispered. "Back when you found me out there on the prairie?" Colter smiled, brushing her cheek with the back of his hand. "I knew I had to keep you safe," he said. "But I had no idea you'd fill up my life like this. That everything before you would feel so hollow." Ruby's eyes danced with emotion. All that from one barefoot girl running from a cruel father, and one stubborn cowboy Colter added, pulling her into a kiss slow and deep-laced with the years they'd built, and the love that never faded. As the sun dipped low, casting golden fire across the land, they walked back hand in hand toward their home, their children, and a future born of survival built on devotion. Over the years, the Hayes family became a cornerstone of the broken Spur and beyond. Colter's name carried weight across the territory as a man of honor and skill. Larger ranches tried to lure him away with offers, but his loyalty stayed rooted. Eventually, he became a full partner in the ranch when Jed Rourke stepped back. Ruby flourished too. She opened a bakery in town, Ruby's Hearth and Crust, where folks lined up before dawn for a slice of her famous apple pie. And though she juggled a bustling home and business, she always made time to help girls who'd walked hard paths like hers. Their children grew under a roof where love was law and safety never had to be earned. Daisy June, their eldest, inherited Ruby's golden hair and Colter's steel resolve. By 16, she could rope a steer better than most men, and her quiet confidence turned heads wherever she went. Luke was gentler often found, with his hands in the dirt or whispering to the calves. His connection to animals made him invaluable come calving season. The twins were night and day. Millie Rose, all books and questions, while Josie Bell climbed fences barefoot and rode wild colts. Still, they were always side by side, loyal to a fault. When Daisy turned 18, the family threw a grand party at the ranch. Ruby stood back and watched her girl dance with Weston McCall, the charming son of a neighbor. Tears welled in her eyes. "What's on your mind?" Colter asked, appearing at her side. His once black hair now carried streaks of silver, but his eyes still held that fire that had caught her long ago. "How different her life is," Ruby said, pressing against him. "She's never known fear. She's never had to beg for kindness. She gets to choose." Colter nodded, his gaze fixed on their daughter's laughing face. That's all we ever wanted, for them to be free. Later that night, beneath the stars and the quiet hum of crickets, Colter took Ruby by the hand and led her out back to the small barn. He lit a lantern and guided her to a wooden bench. There, behind glass in a handcrafted shadow box, were the tattered makeshift shoes, leather, and scraps that he'd made for her in those first raw days. The ones that had shielded her wounded feet on the way to freedom. "You kept these?" Ruby asked, her voice breaking. Colter nodded solemnly. "To remind me how close we came to missing all this. If you hadn't run. If I hadn't been riding that fence line." Ruby's eyes filled. "I used to think it was dumb luck, but now I think it was something bigger." "Fate?" he asked softly. Maybe she whispered. "Or just love knowing where to find us." He wrapped her in his arms, holding her like he had the first time she collapsed into them, wild, afraid, and free. "I thank God every day, Ruby Quinn," he said, "that you came running barefoot into my life." As they strolled back toward the house, hand in hand, beneath a sky blanketed with Texas stars, Ruby couldn't help but think of the road they'd walked, how far they'd come, from fear and loneliness, from dust-choked silence, to a life that echoed with laughter and love. The girl who had once fled barefoot through the prairie with nothing but bruised hope and torn skirts had somehow landed in a life more beautiful than she ever dared imagine. And the cowboy who had scooped her up out of that chaos, he found his anchor in her, his home, his reason. What they had built together wasn't just a house or a family. It was a legacy born from grit and grace, a story etched into the soil with each trial they'd faced and every sunrise they'd watched side by side. At the porch steps, Colter stopped and pulled Ruby close beneath the hush of the moonlight. The scent of hay and hearth hung in the air, mingled with something softer, like the promise of peace, hard-earned. "I love you, Ruby Quinn Hayes," he murmured into her hair, his voice low and full. "More than I did yesterday, and not near as much as I will tomorrow." Ruby looked up at him, eyes clear, voice unwavering. "And I love you, Colter Hayes. You were my storm and my shelter, my rescuer, my one true home." In that moment, wrapped in each other's arms, with the warmth of their house glowing behind them and their children dreaming safe inside, they were exactly who they'd always been, two wandering hearts that had found rest in each other. Not by luck, but by the quiet fire of something greater. Love that rose from ashes and found its way on a wild Texas morning when she ran barefoot from everything she feared, and a cowboy caught up and carried her into forever. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.